New videos every day.
Hi, I'm Radhia Psyhetruth. I'm a certified clinical nutritionist here in Austin, Texas. Today we're going to talk about gluten intolerance. Now, some of you may be familiar with this term, but you may not realize how important it is and its link to disease. I get a lot of clients who come into my office and they have all kinds of conditions, from diabetes to something called Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid disorder, hypothyroid, but it's actually an autoimmune disease. I get people who have osteoporosis and even alopecia, where their hair is falling out. All kinds of inflammatory diseases, skin diseases, GI, gastrointestinal problems, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, etc. And a lot of people don't realize that all of these conditions may be linked to gluten intolerance. The medical paradigm, although they, for the most part, just treat the symptom of these diseases, they don't really go look for the root cause. And it is quite interesting to see the correlation between gluten intolerance and all of these diseases. So let me explain a little bit about what gluten intolerance is. You guys have probably heard about lactose intolerance, all right? And that's for those who basically can't drink milk. And the reason why is because they're missing that lactase, which is that enzyme that breaks down the milk sugar lactose. All right, so they can get now lactase milk that has that enzyme put in there, so they don't have that problem. But with gluten intolerance, it's the same thing. Certain people actually do not have the enzyme that breaks down gluten. Now, what's gluten? All right, gluten is a protein, first of all, and it's found in wheat, barley, rye, and even oats. We're starting to see that there's gluten in oat as well. So grains, especially highly refined grains that we see today that are hybridized, and some of them are actually even genetically engineered grains, these all are high gluten. Gluten is that sort of rubbery, elastic protein substance that gives texture to breads and pastas and pizza dough and bagels. You notice how pizza dough and bagels are high in gluten, and they're very kind of stretchy and chewy. And that's the gluten that's in there. Now, what's the problem with gluten? Well, for those of us that, or not me, but for those who are gluten intolerant, it means that, like lactose intolerant, they don't have the enzyme to break it down. Well, what's the problem? Well, an immune response through an antibody called gliadin is prevalent when there's an immune response to gluten. And the way it works, these antibodies, we call them antibodies, immunoglobulins, and they are there to literally to flag and to identify foreign particles or foreign proteins in the body. So if you have this gliadin antibody prevalent in your system, it means that you don't have a recognition, so to speak, from your own DNA to see that this is a friend or this is okay. Well, what happens is with gliadin antibodies prevalent, this causes the body to have an immune response or an inflammatory or an irritation to the intestinal wall. In the intestine, we have these little villi. These are like little finger-like, tiny, minuscule finger-like protrusions in the intestine. And there's literally trillions of them. I mean, if you were to take these little fingers and stretch them all out, your intestine would be 22 meters. It would fill up an entire tennis court. So this is actually how the body not only moves food particles down through the intestinal system, but it's also how micronutrients, such as vitamins and minerals, slip through, as well as broken down proteins. So we've got, proteins that get broken down through our digestive system, and once they get down into their small amino acids, they slip through these little villi and get into the bloodstream and get to the cell to do their job. But the problem is that if you have an immune response to gluten, this actually flattens down and flattens out these little villi so that they get smashed. The problem with that is that waste material, which is usually swept out or swept through the digestive tract, waste material and toxic buildup can't be filtered out. And so as those toxins become laden in the intestinal walls, this creates, again, immune response and inflammation. Now, inflammation is an immune response, and inflammation is important. I mean, when you cut your arm or something, you notice that in the area it becomes inflamed. This becomes swollen, which adds extra padding. It sends fluid to that to pad it, and it also becomes heated. And this is sort of a localized fever. This keeps or prevents invaders from the outside, such as bacteria, from getting into the system. So it burns it at the site. So inflammation is important, but too much inflammation can be a problem. So they become swollen and inflamed, so you can experience pain as well as, diarrhea and other gas and bloating and other symptoms that can be an indication. So as these undigested proteins that can't be broken down by the enzymes that break down gluten, as they slip through, what happens is they get into the bloodstream because they slip through there, and they cause the immune system to go and tag it as a foreign substance. It doesn't recognize it. And the body goes, hey, you're an enemy, attack it. And they cause this hyperimmune response. Basically, this is an allergy. So technically, gluten intolerance, it doesn't start out to be an allergy. It starts out to be an intolerance, like lactose intolerance. But what it ends up being is causing allergies. And so oftentimes you'll get these hyperimmune response, and the immune system is just working over and over and over again, and eventually it turns on itself. This is where we get autoimmune disease such as lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and other diseases that Hashimoto's disease, which is hypothyroiditis. Other things, for example, and another problem with this villi being flattened out is that micronutrients like vitamins and minerals can't get through. They can't get through into the body, so we get deficiencies, such as mineral deficiencies. So things like osteoporosis and anemia can occur because the body cannot break down and absorb and utilize calcium, or it can't absorb or utilize iron. Or B12 is another problem. With these flattened villi, you get what's called malabsorption or poor absorption. So you can't absorb these important nutrients, and so all these other diseases are linked to this. Now, there is something to be said about certain types of people that are more prone to gluten intolerance. We see that Northern European descent, people who come from Northern European countries, or at least their ancestors did, have a tendency to have more of a gluten intolerant predisposition. We've noticed that because historically, those people, when you follow their genetic lineage to their ancestors, these were in the category of hunter and gatherers. These kinds of people were nomadic for the most part, and they went across the plains and they killed animals, so they ate right off the hoof, and they basically gathered nuts and seeds and wild grasses and leaves. Now, later on, and I suppose this occurred because that kind of lifestyle became very tough on us, we decided to stay put. And this, of course, is the beginning of agriculture. And we decided to farm and harvest these wild grains into domesticated grains and hybrid grains. So things like wheat and rye and barley and oats started to become domesticated grains. Well, our body really wasn't set up to eat these hybrid grains. And what's even worse is today, a lot of these grains are now genetically modified. So they're even more hybrid. And the body isn't our DNA, especially with those kinds of ancestral roots. They don't recognize these grains as being a friend, and they treat them as a foe. So they go after them. And so we set up a hyperimmune response. This is a problem, and this leads to a huge body of diseases that are out there that could be really solved by removing the gluten from the diet. You'll see that typically these nomadic or hunter and gatherer kind of people, which are the oldest in our population, are really the ones that are the O blood type. The O blood type is the hunter and gatherer ancestors, and they basically are not only the largest group in the population, but they are the ones that have this genetic predisposition for gluten intolerance more than some of the other blood types. The A type, for example, which is the agrarian or the agricultural, they kind of emerged out of this cultural civilization, and they can tolerate these grains a little bit better. Although paleontology shows us now, which is kind of interesting, we've been able to study, and we find that in Egypt, the hieroglyphics, which are sort of like, in those days, the royal fashion magazines, they certainly didn't really depict the kings and the pharaohs to be fat and have all of these disease problems. They showed them as being, svelte and whatever. But in actuality, we studied that many of these people of this particular time died of diabetes and some obesity and obesity-related diseases, cardiovascular disease, etc. And so we are seeing a link with these new kinds of grain, and that particular population simply not being able to tolerate them either. I'm going to go into other problems with these grains, even if you're not gluten intolerant. So I'm going to do that in a next upcoming video. So make sure that if you tune back in a few days, we'll have the sequel to this. And we'll talk about why it's important to really watch these refined grains and keep them low or minimal in your diet. And certainly if you're gluten intolerant, keep them out of the diet completely. Otherwise, you're bucking for a disease that I mentioned. You can be tested by looking at these gliadin antibodies. We call them immunoglobulins or Igs. And these are simple tests that you can do to find out if you're gluten intolerant. So stay tuned for the second half of this video. And again, if you want more information, you can reach me at www.advancedhealthinstitute. Make sure that you write in your comments. I love to hear your comments, and make sure that if you have not subscribed to Psychetruth, make sure you do. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
If you liked this video, we have hundreds of more alternative videos ranging from sexual health to psychology to mind control. So if you liked it, go ahead and click on me to enter the Psychetruth channel.